The shocking case of America's most inbred family. They lived like ghosts for 80 years. You could walk past the house 100 times and never know it was there. Hidden behind overgrown pines and forgotten fences, it clung to the hillside like a secret, rotting quietly into the soil. No mailbox. No smoke from the chimney. No signs of life, just the weight of time pressing against the crumbling boards. For the people of Fair Hollow, West Virginia, it was just that old shack up on Dead Man's Curve. A rumor. A shadow. An uncomfortable memory people didn't talk about anymore. But one morning, a young healthcare volunteer made the climb. He knocked. And the moment that door cracked open, the myth became something much darker. Something no one was ready for. My name is Berg, and this is Deep American Shadows. If you're already feeling that cold twist in your chest, the one that says something's deeply wrong, I invite you to subscribe right now. Every week, we explore stories that were meant to stay buried. But here, silence doesn't win. Thank you for being part of this. Ethan Carter had only been in town for 2 weeks when someone finally mentioned the house. He was 26, fresh out of a community health fellowship, and volunteering with a mobile clinic program serving rural parts of Appalachia. Fair Hollow was small, barely a dot on the map, where cell service vanished, and folks nodded more than they spoke. He had made good progress gathering records of local families, updating immunizations, bringing small bags of essentials. But an old man in the diner, someone with eyes cloudy from both age and history, pointed to his clipboard and said he was missing someone. Ethan asked who. The man shrugged slowly and muttered, "They live up past the ridge. Been up there long as I can remember. Don't expect a warm welcome." Curious and concerned, Ethan decided to find out for himself. The trail to the ridge wasn't marked. Locals simply called it the old hunting path, though no one had hunted there in decades. The higher he climbed, the less the forest felt like nature and more like a closed room with no windows. The air thickened. Birdsong faded. Only the sound of his boots crunching damp leaves remained. Finally, at a bend in the path, he saw it, a weather-beaten shack slouched against the mountainside, draped in moss and silence. There was no mailbox. No curtains. A thin strip of gray fabric hung limp across the only visible window. He knocked gently, unsure why he was whispering. No response. He knocked again, firmer this time. Somewhere inside he heard footsteps, soft, light, like a barefoot child. Then a creak. The door opened just wide enough for one eye to peek through. She couldn't have been more than 12. Pale as parchment. Large, unevenly spaced eyes. Chapped lips and a thin white nightgown stained with old dirt. She didn't speak. Just looked up at him with a gaze that wasn't exactly frightened, but wasn't welcoming either. Ethan softened his voice and said he was from the local clinic. That he was just here to check in, to help. He asked if her mother was home. The girl lowered her eyes and pointed deeper into the house. The air inside hit him like a wave, damp, oily, and ancient, as if the walls themselves hadn't breathed fresh air in generations. It took every instinct Ethan had not to turn and walk away. But he stepped inside. The living room, or what was left of one, was stripped down to essentials, if you could call them that. A bare mattress with no sheets. 2 broken chairs. A table tilted to one side like it was surrendering. In the far corner, a man sat on the floor rocking gently, whispering something over and over. His face was long and hollowed, eyes glazed white, mouth slack. He kept muttering the same phrase, "Don't go out, don't go out." Ethan approached slowly, introducing himself again, explaining that he meant no harm. The man didn't respond. Beside the girl now stood a boy. Taller. Maybe 15 or 16. Shoulders hunched, face expressionless. His hand trembled slightly as he held the girl's fingers in his. When Ethan asked their names, neither answered. He tried again, asking softly if their mother was around. The boy asked, almost mechanically, if Ethan had been sent by her. Ethan paused. "Or who?" Then came the voice. It was dry, brittle, and rising from a hallway cloaked in darkness. "Who touched them?" A woman emerged slowly, limping. She wore a tattered shawl over her hair and a mask of exhaustion etched into her features. Only her eyes were visible, and they radiated panic. She said no one was supposed to speak to the children. That contact brought sickness. That since 1944, no one had crossed their threshold. And it had to stay that way. Ethan didn't know how to proceed. Legally he couldn't force his way in. Morally he couldn't walk away. He offered food. No one accepted. But when he opened a small box of wrapped candies, the girl's expression shifted. She stepped forward, took one delicately, and held it like it was treasure. She smiled just barely. It was enough. That day Ethan made a choice. He would return. Over the next few weeks, he climbed the mountain path alone, carrying loaves of bread, sacks of rice, soap, and toothpaste. Each visit, the children opened up a little more. The girl's name was Lily. She wasn't sure how to spell it. The boy was Jacob. He thought he was 15 but might have been younger. Malnutrition made it hard to tell. They had never left the house. Everything they knew about the outside world came from their mother, Margaret. Ethan discovered that the man in the corner, still muttering, still rocking, was their grandfather. And their father. And horrifyingly also Margaret's father. The family tree didn't branch. It curled in on itself, tighter and tighter with each generation. Every word they spoke, every habit, every fear revealed how deep the damage went. The children believed sunlight made people sick. That hospitals stole your soul. That if they stepped past the front steps, their blood would poison itself. And they weren't lying. They were repeating what they'd been taught since birth. Ethan couldn't sleep at night. Their faces haunted him. Their voices clung to his mind like dust. He contacted Helen Brooks, a retired nurse who had spent years doing outreach in the Appalachian region. She agreed to accompany him. The first time she saw Lily and Jacob, she knelt on the floor and wept. She whispered that she'd seen poverty, yes, but never this. Never children so physically fragile and emotionally fractured. She took notes quietly, trying not to overwhelm them. She later told Ethan that their physical traits, pale, translucent skin, widely spaced eyes, weak jawlines, poor coordination, were consistent with long-term inbreeding. What struck her most, though, wasn't the biology. It was the sadness. A sadness so dense it seemed to live in their bones. When Ethan and Helen tried to get the family registered with any government program, they hit a wall. No birth certificates. No social security numbers. No school records. No trace. They did not exist. Helen said the words Ethan had been dreading. They're ghosts. Legal ghosts. One night, during a particularly quiet visit, Ethan gathered his courage and asked Margaret how it had all started. She didn't meet his eyes. She spoke in fragmented sentences, half memory, half ritual. Her grandmother, she said, had fallen in love with her cousin. The town exiled them. They moved into the mountains to escape judgment. From there the family turned inward. Her grandmother married her own cousin. Her mother married her brother. And she had married the son of both. Ethan tried to swallow the bile rising in his throat. How could such a cycle repeat, unbroken, for generations? Where was the community? Where were the authorities? When he asked around town, answers came in half smirks and avoidant shrugs. Some said they knew. Others claimed it was just gossip. One elderly woman said plainly, "It's not your place. They don't want saving. Let them rot in peace." But Ethan couldn't. Every visit deepened the wound. Jacob once showed him a scar down his back, saying his mother had burned him when he tried to open the door. Lily asked if there were really other children in the world. She said sometimes she dreamed of them, but didn't know if they were real or just tricks from fever sleep. The line between tragedy and crime had been crossed long ago. Ethan knew that. And yet, the system around them remained silent. Paralyzed. Unwilling. What came next would push Ethan and Helen to the edge of their own resolve. And it would begin with the sound of an empty house. Helen had seen enough. The children's bodies were collapsing under decades of malnutrition, neglect, and inherited genetic vulnerabilities. And their minds? Those were collapsing too, only slower, quieter, under the crushing weight of isolation. Something had to be done. She and Ethan sat in her truck after one visit, neither saying a word for minutes. The air was thick with the unspoken truth. No one was coming to save these kids but them. They drafted a preliminary report. Helen knew people at the county health department. She'd served on outreach boards and trained dozens of nurses over the years. She tried every contact she had, but the response was lukewarm at best. One official said the case was outside jurisdiction. Another told her to try child services, though he warned that without IDs or proof of guardianship, it'd be a legal mess. When they finally reached a representative from Child Protective Services, CPS, she agreed to go up the ridge with them. Her name was Dana, mid-30s, blazer over hiking boots, clipboard in hand. She lasted less than 15 minutes inside the house. As soon as she stepped into the living room and saw the grandfather murmuring in the corner, the siblings clinging to each other, and Margaret glaring from the shadows like a sentinel, Dana froze. She scribbled a few notes, stepped outside, and told Helen she'd need to request a specialized psychological intervention team. Could take weeks. She never came back. That night, Helen sat at her kitchen table staring at the empty paperwork. Ethan paced the room. They were at a breaking point. The longer they waited, the greater the risk that Lily or Jacob, or both, might simply waste away or vanish into some irreversible mental state. The grandfather had stopped eating almost entirely. Margaret barely acknowledged their presence anymore. It was as though the house was folding in on itself, and the family along with it. "We can't wait anymore," Helen said quietly. "We do this on our own." They formulated a plan. If the system wouldn't intervene, they'd gather enough undeniable evidence to force its hand. Not hearsay. Not second-hand stories. Real, documented proof. Photographs, interviews, medical observations, written testimonies. They would make it impossible to look away. But when they climbed the ridge again, cameras and recorders ready, they found the house empty. The door creaked open on rusted hinges. Inside, everything looked almost the same, almost. The mattress was still there, the broken table, the threadbare chair. But there was a stillness that hadn't existed before. A vacancy. The kind of silence that doesn't just mean absence, but abandonment. Ethan called out their names. No answer. Helen wandered toward the back room. On a low shelf, she found a small wooden box. Inside, a tuft of hair tied with red thread and a folded page from a children's book. Scrawled across the back in shaky handwriting were 5 words. "We left because of fear. Thank you for seeing us." Helen sank to the floor. No tears. No panic. Just exhaustion. She kept repeating, "It's not fair. It's not fair." Ethan tried to stay calm, but inside he was unraveling. They searched the woods, shouting names, scanning the hills for any sign of footprints or broken branches. But it was like the family had evaporated. They descended the mountain and went straight to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a barrel-chested man with sleepy eyes, listened to the story and leaned back in his chair. "If they left," he said with a shrug, "then maybe that's for the best. Some things are better left alone." Ethan nearly shouted. "They're children," he said, fists clenched. "They're victims." The sheriff didn't budge. "They've been up there a long time. Folks around here figured it was best not to interfere. You stirred the hornet's nest, now it's flying." Over the next 3 days, Ethan and Helen searched tirelessly. They printed hand-drawn sketches of Lily and Jacob and left them at gas stations, bus depots, small clinics, and churches. But no one had seen them. The trail went cold. Until the 4th day when Ethan's phone rang. A nurse from a hospital in Knoxville said a young girl had been admitted. No ID, no family, just a first name she repeated again and again, Jacob. They arrived within hours. Lily was lying in a hospital bed with an 4 in her arm, wrapped in thin blankets. She was half-conscious, feverish, sunburned, and bruised from a long walk through dense terrain. Her feet were cracked and bleeding. Her hair had been chopped unevenly as if cut in a rush. She recognized Ethan immediately. Her lips parted, barely audible. "We got separated. Mama said run if something happened." Jacob ran to the river. Grandpa never woke up. Helen gripped her hand, promised she wouldn't be alone again. That they'd take care of her. But legally, Lily was still invisible. No documents. No birth record. No custody. Just a girl with no paper trail and a past too dark for bureaucrats to process. With help from a friend of Helen's, an attorney experienced in emergency guardianship, they filed for provisional custody. It took time, persuasion, and more than a few lies of omission, but eventually Helen was approved to take Lily in as a foster guardian. A new birth certificate was issued under the name Lily Hollow. A new school district was assigned. A medical profile was started from scratch. She had a toothbrush, her own bed, a coat, a backpack. But none of it made her sleep through the night. She woke up crying, whispering her brother's name like a prayer. Helen sat by her bedside, telling her stories, brushing her hair, giving her warm milk. But the fear in Lily's eyes was like ink soaked into the paper of her soul. She kept asking if God was angry. If the mountain had swallowed Jacob. Ethan, meanwhile, refused to give up. He connected with community aid networks, forest rangers, local farmers, even survivalist forums. Weeks passed. One evening, a call came from a man named Clyde, who ran a remote farm halfway between Fair Hollow and the Kentucky border. He claimed he'd seen a boy who matched the drawing, sitting quietly beneath a sycamore tree each evening, never speaking, never begging, just existing. Ethan packed a bag and drove through the night. With a local guide, he hiked to the farm. As the sun dipped behind the hills, they reached the edge of the woods. And there, beneath the tree, sat Jacob. He was rail-thin, eyes sunken, hands tucked into his sleeves. His clothes were tattered. His expression was blank. Ethan approached slowly, said his name. Jacob didn't flinch, just stared. Ethan crouched down, pulled a photo of Lily from his wallet and showed it to him. "She's safe," he whispered. She asks for you every day. Jacob blinked. Then, in a voice that sounded like gravel and wind, he asked, "Does she eat?" Ethan smiled gently. "Yes, she eats. And she has a bed. And books. And someone who hugs her." Jacob looked down. One tear slipped down his cheek. He nodded. The walk back was long and slow. Jacob seemed to flinch at every new sight, a stop sign, a power line, even a passing dog. His world had been a single room. Now it was too big, too loud, too bright. But he never let go of Ethan's sleeve. Helen was waiting on the porch when they arrived. Lily peeked through the window and froze. Jacob looked up. For a moment, neither moved. Then, silently, they ran to each other and embraced. No tears. No words. Just arms around each other like lifelines in a storm. But the reunion was only the beginning of another battle. The state now had 2 undocumented minors under one roof. CPS opened an investigation. Psychologists were dispatched. Questions were asked with sterile clipboards and hollow empathy. Some suggested that Lily and Jacob be placed in separate psychiatric facilities for assessment. Others asked whether the children had been part of a cult. Helen and Ethan fought back. They gathered every document, every photo, every testimony. They called in favors from journalists and legal advocates. Eventually, a local news outlet picked up the story, The Ghost Children of Appalachia. Lily, with Helen's help, wrote a letter. "My house had no windows. Now it has 3. My family was just my brother. Now it's more people. But please don't split us up again." The story spread. Thousands of people across the country read her words. Some criticized Helen and Ethan, accusing them of exploiting trauma. Others offered legal aid, therapy, even homes. The pressure mounted. The state backed off, slowly, reluctantly, but surely. The family from the mountain had finally entered the world. But trauma doesn't disappear with paperwork. And love alone wouldn't be enough. That would be the next challenge. The system had finally blinked. For the first time in nearly a century, the children of that forgotten house had names, legal guardians, and medical files. But the scars of their upbringing weren't just physical or psychological. They were structural. Jacob and Lily hadn't just been neglected. They had been erased, grown like roots in a cave where no sunlight reached. Now, under the full glare of modern life, every new experience hit them with the force of a revelation, or a trauma. Helen turned her modest home in Charleston, West Virginia, into something that resembled a sanctuary. Jacob and Lily had separate rooms, but Lily would still sleep curled up on the floor next to her brother's bed most nights, holding the old stuffed bear they'd rescued from the mountain house. Neither child was used to doors that locked, or opened. They'd ask permission to speak, to eat, even to cry. The walls of their silence weren't easily dismantled. Helen knew this wasn't going to be a typical foster arrangement. It was a reconstruction of identity from the ground up. She found therapists willing to volunteer time, people trained in childhood trauma, cult recovery, and severe isolation. The children were slow to engage. Jacob rarely spoke. Lily drew pictures, strange ones, houses with no windows, people with blank faces, spirals inside spirals. When asked what they meant, she would say only, "It's our language." School was out of the question at first. The local district recommended enrolling them in a specialized transition program, designed for children with extreme developmental delays. Even that seemed too much. So Helen created her own version of school at home. Flashcards, colors, animal names, feelings. Lily caught on quickly, devouring every lesson like someone finally learning the name of her own heartbeat. Jacob struggled. He was bright, Helen could see that, but years of repression had dulled his curiosity. He'd been punished for asking questions. Now he feared even wondering aloud. Ethan continued to visit several times a week. He'd bring coloring books, stories, sometimes nothing at all, just his presence, his quiet steadiness. He became a figure of safety for both kids. One day, while Lily practiced writing her name in careful block letters, Jacob sat down beside her and whispered, "Can I try too?" It took him 10 minutes to form the letter J. But when he finished, he looked up at Ethan and asked, "If I write my name, does that mean I'm real now?" Ethan didn't answer right away. His throat tightened. He just nodded. The outside world had not forgotten the story. The media firestorm around the ghost children of Appalachia had faded from the front pages, but online forums and local news still echoed with debates. Some saw the children as victims of intergenerational abuse and demanded investigations. Others framed them as symbols of government failure in rural communities. Conspiracy theories brewed on dark corners of the internet, claims of secret cults in the Appalachians, child imprisonment, doomsday families hiding from the law. Helen received hate mail. Some accused her of stealing the children. Others called them damaged beyond repair. It became clear that this wasn't just about Lily and Jacob anymore. It was about the systems that had failed them, and others like them. Months passed. The children's health improved. Jacob gained weight, Lily began to smile more easily. They started sleeping through the night, most nights. But the question of what would become of them legally still loomed. Guardianship was provisional. The state needed more documentation, more proof. There were no living relatives to verify birth records. No DNA samples on file. The government required something irrefutable. So Ethan proposed returning to the house. Helen hesitated. "You really think there's something left up there worth finding?" Ethan nodded. "If we don't go back, their story can be dismissed as an anomaly. We need to show it happened. That it wasn't just in their heads." Together they returned, this time with permission from the county to collect evidence. The path was even more overgrown now. The forest had begun reclaiming what once belonged to the family. Vines grew over the fence posts, the porch had partially collapsed, and raccoons had clearly made a home inside. They moved slowly, carefully. Ethan brought gloves and a flashlight. Helen carried a notebook and a camera. Inside the house, the air was different, still stale but hollow. As if even the ghosts had moved on. In the main room, nothing had changed. But in the back closet, Ethan noticed a loose floorboard. He pried it up and found a weathered metal box, the kind soldiers used in old wars. Inside, bones. Small ones. Probably animal, but some looked too small. Human small. Alongside the remains were scraps of paper, some written in what looked like gibberish, others in shaky English. Names. Dates. Phrases like "blood must stay inside," and "she carried the curse from the hills." The most chilling item was a notebook, hand-bound in twine. Page after page of symbols. Circles within circles. Shapes resembling human figures but twisted, incomplete. And one symbol repeated over and over again. A spiral slashed through with a vertical line. Ethan remembered it from one of Lily's drawings. "What does it mean?" Helen whispered. Ethan turned the notebook in his hands. "I think it means us. Or maybe family." They collected everything. Photos, pages, objects. Enough to construct a timeline, a lineage, a living record of generational imprisonment and trauma. Enough, they hoped, to convince the state to close the case not as folklore but as fact. And yet, nothing happened. Weeks passed. Their file sat somewhere in a state office, unopened. The local representative retired unexpectedly. A new caseworker was assigned, someone young, overwhelmed, unfamiliar. She scheduled a phone call with Helen and missed it. Twice. Helen began to realize the truth. The state wasn't going to act unless someone forced them to. So she and Ethan went public. Again. They contacted a national media outlet and pitched the story, not the sensationalized version with creepy photos and dramatic music, but the raw truth. The failure of state systems. The resilience of two children who had never even seen a car until the age of 12. The courage of a woman who chose to become their home. The story aired. It was stripped of melodrama. Just facts, interviews, and the evidence they'd collected. And this time it landed like thunder. Advocates from across the country rallied. Mental health experts, foster care reformists, education nonprofits. Politicians chimed in. The pressure mounted. Within days, the state opened a special commission for isolated minors in rural zones. New policy proposals were drafted. New oversight channels began to take shape. But for Lily and Jacob, it was still just Tuesday. They didn't care about politics. They were trying to learn how to live. One afternoon, Lily brought out a photo album Helen had printed. It contained pictures of their new life. Jacob brushing his teeth, Lily reading on the porch, the three of them sitting around a table with a birthday cake. At the end of the album, on the last page, Helen had left a space blank. She had written in pencil, "Here begins your story." Jacob stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he picked up a crayon and drew the spiral with the line through it. Lily smiled and, with shaky handwriting, wrote a single word beneath it. There were still nightmares. Jacob had moments when he'd freeze up at the sound of an engine, or if someone knocked too loud on the front door. Lily still whispered to herself when she thought no one was listening, repeating phrases she'd learned in the mountain like rituals. But the past no longer held the only key to their identity. That evening, as the sun set over Charleston and the sky turned the color of softened steel, Helen stood at the window and watched them playing in the yard. Jacob was showing Lily how to fly a paper airplane. She laughed, really laughed. A sound that had once been impossible. Helen closed her eyes. The ghosts hadn't vanished. They had simply been given names. In the months that followed the broadcast, the story of Lily and Jacob Hollow reached corners of the country that most rural tragedies never do. Newspapers in Los Angeles wrote about them. A major podcast dedicated a full episode to their escape from generational captivity. Advocacy groups held panels. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #GhostChildren of Appalachia and #Forgotten in America. For a moment, the world seemed ready to listen. But media attention fades fast. Headlines shift. Algorithms bury. What remained was a family of three, Helen, Lily, and Jacob, trying to define what normal could possibly mean after a life spent in shadows. For Lily, adjusting came with a strange mixture of awe and caution. Everything was new. Traffic lights. School bells. Microwaves. She learned to love warm food and soft pajamas. Her favorite thing was water from the tap, cold, endless, and magic. She once told Ethan it felt like the mountain had been lying to her. "We thought the outside world would kill us," she said, "but it's the first place I've ever felt real." She enrolled in a small private learning program with a flexible curriculum designed for trauma-affected children. Her teachers described her as observant, creative, deeply empathetic, but easily overwhelmed. Loud noises sent her into quiet panic. Sudden physical contact made her freeze. But she was trying. And her art was stunning. She painted trees with eyes, houses with wings, and always, that spiral symbol. Sometimes she'd draw it on the back of her hand and whisper, "I belong now." Jacob's progress was slower, more complicated. At 16, though no one could be completely sure of his real age, he'd missed nearly all developmental milestones. Reading and writing remained difficult. He struggled with crowded spaces, group activities, even small talk. His silence wasn't just habit, it was armor. He had learned long ago that words brought punishment. That curiosity was betrayal. That silence meant survival. Helen hired a trauma therapist who specialized in adolescents from extreme isolation. Dr. June Myers, a tall woman with steel-gray braids and the patience of stone, began meeting with Jacob weekly. The first 5 sessions were nearly wordless. They played card games, drew together, stared at fish in the tank. Then one day Jacob asked, "Do you think bad blood can turn good?" Dr. Myers paused, then answered gently, "I think love changes blood." From that point on, Jacob began to unfold, not quickly, not in bursts, but like thawing earth in spring. He started tending a small garden in Helen's backyard, finding comfort in routine, in growth, in touching the dirt with his bare hands. He named the first tomato plant Henry. Lily thought it was hilarious. Jacob didn't explain it. He didn't need to. Still, the trauma echoed. They were safe now, but safety couldn't erase memory. Jacob often flinched at the sound of helicopters. Once, when Helen's neighbor set off backyard fireworks for Memorial Day, Jacob ran into the bathroom and locked the door. He stayed there for nearly an hour, trembling, mumbling a phrase Helen had never heard before, "The air will burn us." It took her days to understand that in the mountain house, loud noises were interpreted as omens, signs that something bad was coming, like a sickness or a death. Meanwhile, Lily began asking harder questions. Where did their mother go? Was she dead? Was she evil? Could someone who hurt you still be a victim too? Helen didn't have the answers. She wanted to say that Margaret was a monster, but that wasn't true. Margaret had been born in that same house. She had been groomed to believe in curses and bloodlines and silence. Her crimes were unforgivable. But her humanity was undeniable. In many ways she was the first prisoner. One night, Lily found a news article online with a blurry photo of the house on the ridge. It had been demolished by the county after it was deemed unsafe. She stared at the screen for a long time and then said, "That's where our ghosts are buried." Helen asked if that made her feel better. Lily shook her head. No, just real. Later that week, Helen received a call from a woman named Karen Belmont, a historian from the University of North Carolina. She specialized in forgotten communities and sociological phenomena in rural Appalachia. She had seen the news coverage and asked permission to visit. Helen was hesitant at first. She didn't want the children turned into case studies. But after a long conversation she agreed, on the condition that the meeting would be informal, private, and child-led. Karen visited on a warm afternoon in May. She brought old maps, copies of census records, and a box of apple fritters. Lily took to her immediately. They spread the papers across the living room floor and traced the family lineage as far back as they could. Karen confirmed what Helen had long suspected but never had proof for. The Hollow family wasn't the only isolated bloodline in the region. She mentioned other cases, Unregistered families, hidden compounds, folklore-driven parenting. There's a darkness in forgotten places, Karen said softly, but also an endurance. She left the house with Lily's latest painting in hand, a tree growing from a spiral, its branches reaching into a blue sky. On the back, Lily had written, "We didn't get lost. We got found." The next chapter in their journey was the most difficult yet, the state's final custody hearing. Despite the outpouring of public support, despite the mountain of evidence and progress, Helen still had to prove that keeping Lily and Jacob together, under her care, was in the best interest of the children. 2 state-appointed psychologists conducted interviews. A third-party guardian ad litem was brought in. There were meetings, home visits, forms, background checks. Lily prepared a speech. She insisted on reading it at the hearing. On the morning of the court date, she wore a pale yellow dress and carried the notebook Helen had given her. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stepped forward, opened the notebook and read. "We come from a house with no books. From silence and sickness. From people who thought they were protecting us. But they were really keeping us small. Now we have toothbrushes. And names. And songs. We want to stay here. We want to grow here. Please let us keep the light." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The judge took a long breath and recessed for lunch. By the afternoon, the decision was official. Helen Brooks was granted permanent custody. When the 3 of them left the courthouse, reporters waited outside. Cameras flashed. Lily flinched and grabbed Jacob's hand. Helen stepped forward and spoke with the calm of someone who had carried pain longer than she ever planned to. "These children are not a story. They are not an article. They are not entertainment. They are survivors. And from now on, they get to choose what parts of themselves they want to share." Then she turned and walked away with them. That night, back at home, Lily and Jacob cooked dinner with Helen. Just spaghetti and garlic bread, but they were so proud. Jacob even set the table. Lily folded napkins into little triangles and placed a drawing of the spiral symbol beside each plate like a crest. When they sat down, Jacob looked at Helen and asked, "Do you think the others are still out there?" Helen paused. "Other children like you?" Jacob nodded. "Yes," she said. "I do." He stared at his plate for a moment. "Do you think they'll ever get out?" Helen didn't know. But she answered anyway. "Not all of them. But maybe some. If we keep trying." That night, Lily dreamed she was back on the mountain. But this time, the house had windows. And every window was open. She stood inside holding a candle and waited. Outside, dozens of children approached, each carrying a candle of their own. And when she woke, she wasn't afraid. Time moved differently now. For Lily and Jacob, the rhythm of their days was no longer dictated by fear, hunger, or silence. It was shaped by new habits. Brushing teeth before bed, saying good morning at breakfast, learning to tie shoelaces, sounding out new words. It was shaped by warmth, blankets tucked in, safe hugs, songs playing softly from the kitchen radio. But trauma, even when buried, has roots. Some nights, Jacob still woke up gasping, convinced the floor beneath his bed would open into darkness. Lily sometimes whispered prayers in a language she and her brother had created as children, a mix of memory, myth, and coded survival. Helen never interrupted. She listened. She let them mourn the ghosts of their own upbringing in their own time and on their own terms. Jacob eventually enrolled in a vocational learning program. He struggled with classroom environments, but flourished when given a task and space to focus. One instructor told Helen that Jacob reminded him of his son, quiet, deliberate, and gentle with his hands. He liked working with wood. On weekends, he started carving small figurines, trees, birds, and strange looping symbols from the notebook he had once hidden under his pillow. One afternoon, Ethan stopped by with an old box of children's books he'd picked up from a school that was closing down. Jacob rummaged through them, uninterested, until he found a picture book about bridges. It wasn't the architecture that caught him. It was the idea. "That's what we're doing," he told Ethan. "Building a bridge out of the mountain." Meanwhile, Lily began to write. Not just school assignments but full-on stories. She filled spiral notebooks with tales of children lost in fog who found secret doors in the trees, of girls who spoke to shadows and convinced them to turn into light. In every story there was a brother. And in every story the siblings survived. Her favorite place to write was under the old maple tree in Helen's backyard. She would sit for hours, knees folded beneath her, pencil smudging her fingers. One day she handed Helen a folded paper. On it, a single sentence. "When no one comes to save you, sometimes you become the one who saves." Helen kept it in her wallet. Spring melted into summer. The garden in the backyard, once Jacob's project of healing, began to bloom. Tomatoes, bell peppers, sunflowers. Helen would often catch the children outside at dusk, hands dirty, eyes full of something new, something that looked suspiciously like peace. But their story wasn't just personal anymore. It had become part of something larger. The national attention surrounding their case had led to legislation in several states, including West Virginia, mandating regular wellness checks in high-risk rural zones. A pilot program named Hollow Watch was launched, a community-based initiative pairing trained volunteers with remote families flagged as potentially vulnerable. Helen and Ethan served as advisors. Jacob helped design the program's logo. Lily drew the cover for the training handbook, a simple spiral with a line drawn through it. Media outlets tried to revisit the story, eager to catch a "where are they now" moment. Helen declined all interviews. She explained it to Lily and Jacob like this: what the world needed to hear they already heard. The rest of your life is yours now. Still, something inside both children wanted to give back. When a local nonprofit asked if they could share Lily's drawing in a campaign about invisible children, she agreed, on one condition: that her name not be listed. Instead, beneath the image, the message simply read, "We are here now. And we are not alone." In private moments, the past still found them. Once, Helen heard Lily crying softly in her room. She found her sitting on the floor, holding the red-threaded bundle of hair they had found in the mountain house. The one Ethan had hidden away in the attic, but Lily had quietly retrieved. "It was my sister," she said. "I don't know her name, but I think she was the first. Before us. Before the rules got worse." Helen said nothing. Just sat beside her. Jacob, too, had moments where the weight of inheritance pressed down. During a therapy session he said, "I think we were made from shadows." The therapist asked, "And what are you now?" Jacob thought for a while and said, "Light with shadows inside." It was never going to be a storybook ending. They knew that. No family therapy or community program could erase the years lost, the lives twisted by fear disguised as tradition. But Lily and Jacob weren't broken. They were survivors of a structure that had tried to crush them, and failed. On the first anniversary of their arrival at Helen's home, they held a small celebration. No party. No cake. Just the three of them sitting on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. Helen gave them each a small gift. To Jacob, she gave a pocket knife, engraved with his initials and the phrase, "Build the bridge." To Lily, she gave a leather-bound journal, the first page inscribed with, "Write the light." The next morning, Lily wrote the beginning of a story she would later read aloud at a youth conference for survivors of family abuse. It began like this. There once was a house where the windows were lies, and the walls held secrets like teeth. But one day a knock came, not to take but to ask. And that's when the house cracked and the children stepped out into the world. Today, Lily and Jacob continue to grow. They are no longer referred to as the ghost children. In their neighborhood, they're just kids. They mow the lawn. They argue over what movie to watch. They laugh. They worry about tests. They dream. They dream of a future. One where silence doesn't win. Where no child goes unseen. Where no house in the woods remains a prison simply because no one dared to knock. And maybe, just maybe, where bridges reach even the darkest hills. If you've made it to the end of this story, then you already understand why we tell them. Because silence protects no one. Because truth, however uncomfortable, is necessary. And because behind every closed door, behind every crumbling house, there might be a Lily or a Jacob, waiting to be seen. This is Deep American Shadows, and I'm Berg. If this story moved you, I invite you to subscribe. We bring you the hidden stories that demand a voice, every week. Like, share. And let us know in the comments, what does it mean to see someone? And more importantly, who around you might still be waiting to be seen?